Let's do this AOC clip here. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez went on CBS, their Sunday political show with Margaret Brennan. I think it's Face the Nation is what it's called. And they were speaking about immigration policy at the southern border. AOC brings up the sanctions against Venezuela and sanctions in general, and what those kinds of economic chokeholds do to countries and to populations in those countries, who then become desperate and seek to live elsewhere so they can provide for their family. I think this is incredibly important to counter-program the national discourse around immigration, which is just the border's a mess. We've got to get more militant.
All these people want to come here just because of all the great stuff going on in America.
Because of the freedom.
Not because we've been sanctioning their country trying to do regime change.
Yeah, because our streets are paved with gold and whatnot. It relies on this adherence to American mythology that the rest of the world just doesn't share. But regardless, the Biden administration and Democrats in general should take a page out of her book here, because there needs to be a counter narrative, as I say, to the incredibly right-wing framing around militants at the border. And I think she did a good job here doing so.
I definitely think that we need to have comprehensive immigration reform so that we aren't constantly doing this patchwork policy extensions. That has not happened for decades. But additionally, I think we also need to examine the root of this problem, because if we are constantly engaging in foreign policy that drives people to our southern border. In this specific instance, U.S. sanctions that were originally authored by Marco Rubio began and precipitated, certainly took a large part in the driving of populations to our southern border. Shortly after those sanctions, those broad-based sanctions.
You're talking about Venezuela.
Yes. Shortly after those broad-based sanctions were enacted, we started seeing dramatic increases in these populations that were coming to our southern border. And so we have to address the root of these population movements and the migration crisis, and we also have to address the domestic U.S. policy issues when it comes to immigration reform.
But the Maduro government has also been responsible for large parts of that. Are you saying that you want the Biden administration to pull back pressure on him?
I think we need to re-examine the nature of these sanctions. There are sanctions that are very specific. For example, the Magnitsky Act sanctions that do actually focus on the decision makers and people who may be violating norms, practices, civil rights. Mm-hmm. But broad-based sanctions that punish the overall economy and harm everyday working people that are driving them into the economic and political destitution that force millions of people, both not just to the United States, but even to our regional partners.
Yeah, I don't. That was an odd cut there, but that is, I thought, a very well stated case for ending what she defines as broad-based sanctions. There, look, like she is speaking to a broader audience than we would be on this program, so she's going to give more deference to, Margaret Brennan's needless interjection about Maduro there and things like that. But the reality is that Venezuela's economic contraction as a result of the United States' sanctions is completely something that you can draw a line to in terms of
Yes.
the influx of migrants from Venezuela. Like, oil is a huge part of the Venezuelan economy, a massive part. And the sanctions that the United States has been engaged in really since the Bush administration, and then they got ramped up and put on steroids under Trump, have resulted in deep economic desperation in Venezuela, forcing people to go elsewhere. And this was all a part, really, like, we pretend as if this is a way to help the Venezuelan people long term.
No.
When in reality, what it is a way to make the conditions in a nation so difficult that they turn on the leader that we as the United States don't like. First it was Chavez, and now it's Maduro.
Yep. And
we propped up Juan Guaido, who claimed to be the leader of the country falsely, for years. And both parties were a part of that. And it hasn't worked. And in fact, it has actually spilled over to the United States, and then all the Republicans want to do is triple down and be even more cruel to the people that we starved.
I mean, what happened was basically John Bolton got in and said this stuff where we're like we've been sanctioning this country for a long time, calling them drug traffickers and stuff like that, basically because they don't play nice with the Bush administration. That's not working enough. I mean, it's crippled their oil industry, which is by far the main industry. I believe over this time period, there's been like a triple Great Depression in terms of the contraction, the greatest contraction in the economy that wasn't in wartime. And Bolton's like, that's not enough. We need to take this further and do a war crime and fully put the screws to this economy. So like you say, the people get so sick of it that they support Guaido. It was always a stupid, because this entire the entire Venezuelan state is ran through with Chavez folks still. And so the idea that you're just going to install a guy like Juan Guaido because you did a couple publicity stunts was always ludicrous. But it was the type of ludicrous that John Bolton could get behind. And we should be clear about that. And the problem that it's hard to be clear about that this is just America doing this sort of right-wing American thing is that people like Elizabeth Warren got behind it.
Right.
And we need that stuff. Guaido is quote tweeting AOC now saying, "Oh yeah, you're all right, but actually we still need to sanction people," and it's disgusting. Guaido's disgusting because you look at
he's a puppet of United States influence, and I would imagine that just to flesh out what you're saying, Matt. I mean, the Bolton view is an incredibly cynical view about the populations in these countries, as if they don't have the understanding that this is U.S. Western influence backing up this candidate. Yes. I mean, that was clear.
74% of the population no longer agrees with the international sanctions against Venezuela, compared to 70% who do. Nearly 30% of the population blames sanctions for the current situation. In particular, 76% express their interest in the removal of oil sanctions. Personal sanctions against certain officials are approved by 52% of Venezuelans. And again, you look at just in terms of geopolitics, Europe, my understanding, people can correct me if I'm wrong on this, isn't as in on the collective punishment angle of let's turn this into a basically failed state. Venezuela used to be rich decades and decades ago. We don't really remember it, but let's turn this into a failed state entirely because we want to basically install a America-friendly leader there.
Yeah, it is. That's the next domino that needs to fall for the Biden administration to regain some credibility when it comes to its relationship with
normalize relations.
Yeah, with Latin America. Let's normalize relations. It's a good step that Biden and Lula are having talks and other things like that, and that the United States is choosing to recognize the legitimate results of the election in Guatemala, whatever. That is an improvement, but it's not enough because the sanctions needs to be done away with. And Biden could easily sell it to the public too by saying, "Yeah, we want their oil. Saudi Arabia's screwing me. They're going to raise prices again.
We want their oil. We want less refugees. And let's normalize things."
And he's going to raise prices again. Let's be clear here. MBS is a total psycho. We'll play a clip from him in a little bit because he did a Fox News interview. But he understands he can bully Biden pretty easily. He raised prices before by choking down supply. He'll do it again, guaranteed. Ahead of the election in 2024. And I understand that, maintaining our relationship with Saudi Arabia is less about getting their oil supply and more about preventing other actors like China from gaining access to it. But broadly, I'm not that concerned about that. No. You could easily at least offset it to the public by normalizing relations with Venezuela.
And any sort of issues with civil corruption and stuff like that can be best dealt on a normalized situation where you're not destroying an economy and among countries closer to the region, in my opinion.
Agreed.